Okay, we're now past Chatzot, so it's my pleasure to welcome Nachshon Rodrigues Pereira from Amsterdam all the way here to Bevis Mark's Synagogue in London. I think his face is out of the screen for the moment, but Chazaku Baruch on a beautiful rendering of the service, which is always so haunting and so moving. As I mentioned last night, this year is an easy year to get into the mood of Tisha B'Ab as we experience much lamentation in our own lives and in Israel. And yet we know that for some, while this is, shall we say, an experience usually difficult for us to get into or to capture that feeling, it's not quite the case in Amsterdam. Amsterdam community was decimated during the Holocaust, and in many ways, the ghosts of that continue to linger for the community there. Nachshon's family thankfully survived the Holocaust. Nachshon descends from ministers and rabbis, chachamim, in the community, and continues to carry on the traditions, to uphold the Portuguese traditions in Amsterdam, for many years serving as the Chazan at Desnocha, and now leading his own Portuguese community of Bendigamos. And so we thank Nachshon for joining us here at Bevis Marks, as he has done for many years. And we thank Nachshon for also agreeing to share a bit more about the story of the Sephardim in Amsterdam during the dark years of the Shoah.
Thank you, Rabbi Morris, for this great introduction and for having me again here for Tisha B'Av. It's really nice to see all of you. You are very welcome to come sit closer, by the way. It's really okay. It's really okay if you come sit closer. So I was asked to share with you some words about the influence, the impact of the Second World War on the Spanish and Portuguese community, the Jewish community of Amsterdam. And I do not have a clock with me, so if I have like 10 minutes before Mincha, please just wave at me so I'll know. There's also some room for questions. As you know, the Amsterdam community was really big before the Second World War. There was about 6 million people living in the Netherlands, and well over 100,000 people, about 140,000 of those people were Jewish. The majority of them lived in Amsterdam, and many quarters of Amsterdam had a Jewish presence of 25 to even 50%. And in the previous centuries, Amsterdam might have been even called the center of the Jewish world. Of course, that changed a bit after a while, but especially in the 17th, 18th century, that was where the center of Judaism was. It's where the biggest rabbis were. It's where the biggest schools, Jewish schools were. So it was a huge Jewish community with a huge heritage and a huge impact on the Dutch country as well. Its culture, its economy, its thinking. One of the logos of the Synagogue is actually the phoenix, because the community has risen from its ashes after the Inquisition, and unfortunately we had to do that again after the Second World War, when only 10% of the community survived. Only 10%, so it was literally decimated. By the way, what happened to my family and most families, my mom's family, Ashkenazi family, not many of them survived. My grandfather had a British passport and he worked for Philips, and that helped him. He was in the camps, and because he was from Philips, he was taken out of the line a few times from being assassinated, and eventually he made it. Many of them, I think including my grandfather, were on a train. Many of the Jewish people that are now still in Amsterdam and their descendants, they were on a train on their way to Auschwitz a few days before the end of the war. And with whatever people had still left on the train, they bribed the conductor to go slower, and the war ended before they were actually in Auschwitz. And many of the Jewish families that are still left from Amsterdam were on that train. On my dad's side, most of them survived, and they were hidden. I mean, of course, people were killed, but like my direct ancestors, they survived. But the community, 90% of them were killed. There's a few reasons why this percentage is so high, and also the amount of Jews in percentage in the Netherlands that was killed was over 80%, which is the highest percentage in Western Europe. There's Poland with a higher percentage, but other than that, it's a very high percentage. And that means that the community there has been impacted to a level that you won't see or feel anywhere else because it's such extreme numbers. There's a few reasons for this. First reason is that the Dutch were very organized, much more than most other countries, so they had good administration, and the administration included also your religion. So it was easier to find the Jews. Secondly, unfortunately, the Dutch culture and the German culture were, let's say, compatible, and the ideas that the Germans had about race, they were easier, they found easy ground in the Netherlands. So also they didn't have to do that much to find them to cooperate. There were some very, well, let's say the Dutch in general are more pragmatic, and opportunistic. So they had freedom of religion, from the 17th century. They didn't mind if people were inside their country and live and not live, as long as it didn't bother them. But as soon as they saw that the Jews became a problem, they also didn't have so much problem to give it up again, because it was not really in their favor anymore. And so you see that a lot of Dutch people also ratted out the Jews there. They received 7 guilders and 50 cents for that. And another reason is that the Germans already from a very early age, from a very early point in time, have been very stern, very strict with any opposition. So also the people that wanted to do something against them, the Germans showed a very strong message that they wouldn't allow it. So all these sort of things led to a very high percentage of Jews being killed in the Netherlands. There's another one, possibly why the Portuguese Jews had such a high percentage compared even to the Ashkenazim. And this is something that very, very, very few people know about. Very few. It's something called the Actie Portugesia. The Actie Portugesia was a way of the Portuguese community Jews to use the racial laws of the Germans against themselves, against the Germans. Because the Germans said the Jews are a different race, they are of a lower race, and so they are Untermenschen. And the Portuguese Jews said, we're not that same race. We are coming from a whole different area of the world. We are Spanish and Portuguese, and we were forced for centuries just to marry each other, so we are very different people. And they supported that with scientific researches, like they all did. So they measured their skulls and the shape of their eyes and everything. They brought a whole report, and they thought that this could actually work out. I mean, they knew they were already lost anyway, so they thought maybe we could just try this. And they were able to stall a decision on this for 2 years. But eventually, of course, in Germany, they said they're all Jews, and then it ended. But it's very possible that because of this, some community members actually believed that this was going to save them, and that's why they didn't find refuge as soon or as much as the Ashkenazi Jews would have done. However, this is how 90% of the Jewish community, the Portuguese Jewish community, which at that point had about 4,000 families, were killed. And that means that after the Second World War, only 400 families were left. You can imagine if you have a synagogue like this, but I would say it's almost twice as big, the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam. If you have to fill that community with only 400 of the families, of course, many of them were shattered, were traumatized, didn't want to do anything with Judaism anymore, were not able to have children, were not necessarily Orthodox or practicing or living near, that has been incredibly difficult for that community to stay alive. And of course, it wasn't like in the Netherlands that you could just restart your life. It's not like, oh, you know, we had 5-6 difficult years and now we can just start going. The recognition for what happened to the Jews in the Netherlands, some sort of apologies, foundations, whatever, really only started 20, 30 years later. So in the first years, many people came back to their homes were gone, their stuff was gone, their passports were often taken. So they really had to rebuild also their own lives from scratch often. And even today, 80 years later almost, there are still hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of Jewish art that are in hands of either musea or even the Dutch government, and we're still fighting to get it back, to find it back, and things like that. So that's really harsh if you think about it. Also, only a few years ago, the Dutch railway company gave some money back to the Jewish community for the money they made out of the deportations, and the Jews even had to pay their own tickets to the east from the Dutch railway. So they got some money for that. The Amsterdam government, the municipality, gave back some money to the Jewish community symbolically for the taxes they've raised to the Jews while they were deported with help of Amsterdam. When the Jews came back, they had to pay the taxes for the time they weren't there, the city taxes for the time they weren't there. So that was also given back only recently, and there's more cities like this that are still researching about what happened. And we can be assured that many properties and monies will not be given back to the community. However, even though the community now is receiving money from that, from the Second World War, from money that belonged to people, but they couldn't, there's no recipients left, so they gave it to the community as a whole. Even though there is money in the Jewish community, they're not really doing so much with it, because I would say, and this is also part of this lecture, the community is still traumatized. Just because of all the things that happened, and because it's such a huge trauma that it takes time, but also healing to be able to deal with it. And they didn't really have time for that. They've really struggled to uphold this community, which is the regular infrastructure that you have for a community of, well, the Portuguese ones, 400 families, but also for the Ashkenazi community, it's basically the same thing. They have I'd say 20,000 Jews in Amsterdam. Only 10%, 15% are affiliated with the Jewish organization. So the whole infrastructure is kept up by about 3,000 people, let's say. That's 15 synagogues, it's schools, it's cemeteries, it's the kashrut, it's the Jewish stores, it's the museum and all the foundations and the music and the culture. All this is kept by these few people, all the board members, all the donations. Like, most of it is just coming from this very small group. And of course, you're not going to close down a synagogue that looks like this, not if you're Ashkenazi, not if you're Sephardi. So you keep it up with 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, and together they're carrying a load which is actually too heavy a burden for them to be thinking of anything else. Even if they wanted to, it's a very heavy burden. Now, because of the Second World War trauma, there's a couple of other effects that it has on the community in Amsterdam. First of all, you can imagine that if 90% of your community has been killed, you're not like, oh, you know what, there's 400 of us left, let's make a party, let's build, let's grow, let's go for a bright future. Fortunately, I don't have to even imagine what it's like to come out of the war and have to deal with something like that. But we can all understand that that's not the first thing on your mind, and it's very difficult to do that, to really look for a bright future again. Secondly, the trauma itself the generation that's now leading the communities, most of, just like here, we have the, let's say the baby boomer generation, people that are now in their 60s, 70s, taking care of the communities. And often they were raised shortly after the war with parents that were often emotionally unavailable. To give you an example of my grandfather, who said that, completely understandable, he says, the pain that I had to go through losing my family, I don't want to go through that pain ever again. And the solution was not to let anyone too close to him, because then you would never have to feel that pain if they were taken away from you. So the leaders of the Jewish community, many of them were raised like this, which means that their parents were not emotionally available. It means it's difficult for them to deal with emotions, with conflicts. If you take all this together, you don't get a very healthy, positive setting for example, my generation, the generation below me, to thrive, to find positive, happy Judaism, to where people invest in the future, in youth, in education, because it's really not there yet. I mean, there's still too much trauma and heaviness in the community for it to really take off. And this is actually one of the main reasons why, for example, my initiative, but there's fortunately more initiatives in Amsterdam like this, where one generation below just says, you know what, we're going to do something different. We're going to start a new community with a less heavy mindset, where we can start to look forward again, where we can start healing as a community. But still, even 80 years later, we have to do a lot of work there. And if you don't heal, if you don't find a way to heal, then often you just give it further to the next generation. There's a further bias in Amsterdam, because if you are happy, positively Jewish, and you want a future, and you are active, you want to grow your community, you want to have something for your children, you want them to find a Jewish partner. We have, as I said, 85% of the Jews unaffiliated. We have 85% Jews that intermarry, 85%. So many of the more practicing Jews, or many of the people that are more prone to change and to adapt and to look to the future, they have left, of course, the community of Amsterdam. They went to England, they went to America, they went to Israel. So that's another challenge for the Amsterdam community. So basically, in Amsterdam, with the Portuguese Jews, with these 400 families, they have about 500 members, more or less. There's the big synagogue in the center, which typically gets between 10 and 20 members on Shabbat morning. And then there's one in the suburb that's imploded, basically. It had quite a lot of people, but because of the same fighting and heavy atmosphere, actually, the same thing happened there, where it weren't able to bring the community to the future. It's really difficult for them to keep it up. And really the only thing, because that's a positive note, the only thing I see is that the 85% of the unaffiliated Jews, many of them feel their Jewish identity, they're positive about it, they want to do something with it, and I see that there's a huge growth potential. And I see that with the community that we have, that if you provide this happy, positive environment, where I think that the S&P values, even if you're not S&P yourself, if it's not how you grew up with, in the 21st century, for the students we have, for people that live in Holland, in a Western society, the S&P values, the S&P traditions, the S&P way of thinking is really close to what works for them. So we see that if you offer an environment like that for them, that they're interested, they'll come, they'll stick around, and you can grow. And that's absolutely the good news, I think, from the community today, that there is a lot of potential, and that there's thousands of people that we can bring back, and they're willing to learn, and they're willing to also learn our traditions, for example. So I've been told that I have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to give those 5 minutes to you to give you the chance to ask questions. I want to already thank you for your attention. I hope this gave you a bit of an idea of what the community in Amsterdam is dealing with right now. And I'm also really happy that we're going to have Mincha here for the first time in many years. So I'm also looking forward to that. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Well, I would like to find out more about the Portuguese time, this deal that they tried to persuade the Germans that they were slightly different. And my family is half, like you actually, half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi, all from Amsterdam. And I know that a lot of the family died or taken away in 1944. But if you like late,
Yes.
and as you say, they didn't hide because they thought they would maybe get away with it.
Exactly. So there is a man called Jaap Cohen. He's the son of the former mayor Job Cohen, the Jewish father, and he has done a very extensive research on this with pictures and everything, and he wrote a book about this. It's part of a book which is called something about the life of Uri de Oliveira. I don't think it's been translated to English, but you can find it in Dutch, and it will have this information. And I'm sure you can also contact him. His name is Jaap Cohen.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. You also, I have to say that your Facebook, Bendigamo's Facebook, is very positive. It's a very positive. There's always a positive message every Shabbat. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes,
I'm
Nachshon.
vaguely aware of relations between the Sephardi community generally and Spain and Portugal and their governments, and trying to encourage people who can show their lineage goes back to Spain in the 15th century to get passports and all sorts. Would you like to just spend a minute or so on that?
I can absolutely say something about that. So, in short, there is virtually no relations between the Jewish community in the Netherlands and Spain and Portugal, basically none. However, we have individual Jews in Amsterdam that have applied for a passport in Spain or Portugal because that is a policy, although they are starting to end the policy already. My father has actually applied for a passport successfully, so he is now Portuguese citizenship, and I could get it as well. Some say that the main reasons for the people to do that in Spain and Portugal was mainly also opportunistic or for economic reasons. However, it also feels like some sort of justice to get the passports back that belong to us. But I think in the Netherlands it has very little impact. Just a handful of people may have asked for it, and there haven't been really relations between that. However, Bendigamos is going to apply for some sort of relationship with the Portuguese embassy, so that could be the first step.
Could you speak a little bit about the magnificent library in the Synagogue?
Well, we have a magnificent library. It's called Etz Chaim. It's from 1616. It's not just a library, it's actually a school. It used to be a school where the rabbis would be educated. They have books not just about Jewish things, but books about everything, including building ships and philosophy and everything. I could just recommend everyone to go there and have a look. You do have to make an appointment, but it's really a very, very impressive library, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage. Thank you.
Wonderful. I just want to thank Nachshon for sharing about a topic which I'm sure is difficult, even though you're not of that generation. Like you said, it's palpable. And to appreciate how long the impact of suffering can last, but at the same time, how perhaps it can also be something to inspire something more positive for the future, and something wonderful about whether simply just sharing about it, but also the relationship that we have here at Bevis Marks with Nachshon about building historic communities for a future generation is something that I think we share quite a lot in common. And we gain strength from hearing what you are doing, and I hope that your visits here also feed into what you do as well. But we look forward to seeing both of our communities grow and the relationship between our communities grow stronger into the future.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.